So the deportation of Mahmoud Khalil has not taken place yet, as far as I understand. It has been in the proceedings, but it has become very much of a nationwide issue with sort of people trying to defending him, saying his First Amendment rights are being violated and that he is being prosecuted or persecuted even for his views on, let's say, the pro-Palestinian movement or his alleged sort of like pro-Palestinian attitudes. Joining us today is Adam Ossoff, a professor of law. Welcome to the Daily Objective, and this should be really interesting. We've already covered the case of Mahmoud Khalil in the past, even trying to go more into sort of the law aspects of it. But having someone who actually studied the law is always great. So, Adam, welcome to the Daily Objective. And yeah, so maybe just your opening thoughts. What do you make of the whole, basically, the fact that his deportation has started and was sort of quickly stopped, but is now in the proceedings? What do you make of that?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I mean, specifically with respect to Mahmoud Khalil, like, I don't think his deportation was stopped. I mean, he's going through the proceedings. And I mean that there are specific proceedings that you have to go through. He has a lawyer or in fact several lawyers, from what I understand. And they have filed various pleadings. And this is what, you would expect in any particular proceedings for deportation. If someone wishes to raise issues, they can, and they will, and those issues then have to be addressed. So, I'm, particularly interested in this topic, not because I'm an expert in immigration law, which I'm not, but I am able to read statutes and I know what the legal issues are. But more specifically, I'm particularly interested in this issue because I have been following very closely the activities of Mahmoud Khalil and many of his fellow activists on U.S. campuses for the past 18 months. And it is very surprising to me to hear many people state that he is being deported for just his views, for just his, for having ideas, and that this is a free speech issue, because it is not. It's not a free speech issue. And it's unfortunate that a lot of really good people are confused by this and don't understand this issue.
Yeah, I mean, even when we started hearing about this, he was one of the first people. And so, yeah, what is the justification the Trump administration is using for his deportation? And do you think it's sort of properly applied here?
Yeah, so I see that there's probably several issues that are contributing to this confusion. And one of them is that if you have only been reading the New York Times, the Washington Post, or Washington CNN, you would not know the extent of the actual violent, destructive, illegal activities that Mahmoud Khalil and his organization, the Students for Justice in Palestine, and the related pro-Hamas organizations that exist throughout the country now have been engaging in, because they haven't been reported on. In the same way that, during, the riots in 2020, that were occurring throughout the United States, if you were just following, kind of primary, what is referred to as mainstream media sources, you were being told these are mostly peaceful. And you wouldn't know. I mean, that has become kind of the meme, the joke, mostly peaceful, for actually what it means to burn down buildings and loot stores and do the typical type of destructive activities that people who riot engage in. And then, unfortunately, people like President Trump say, we're deporting people like Mahmoud Khalil because, he believes in terrorism and stuff. But actually, if you pay attention and follow the officials who are responsible for this, in particular, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I mean, they are very clear and very explicit. And again, this is unfortunate. It's not being reported on. I mean, you wouldn't know this if you just read the New York Times, but if you know, uh, see the videos or see the press conference clips that are posted on X and are shared on other social media sources, you will see that they're very explicit about why they are deporting him. And it is not just simply because he happens to believe in Hamas or in genocidal anti-Semitism. I mean, it's that he has taken actions that violate the actual explicit laws that govern green card holders and student visa holders in this country.
Yeah, I mean, that was always sort of the biggest problem with what we now call the campus intifada. And you see that you see the similarities that even when the police finally started, let's say, I think it was Colombia, where police finally, after days, decided to go in and basically kick out the students from illegally occupying buildings, breaking the law, breaking the rules of the university itself, and people were saying that this is police brutality, this is a free speech issue, when it clearly wasn't. They were violating rights, the property rights of those universities, and the universities oftentimes didn't do anything about the fact what the students are doing. They decided to instead negotiate with the students. So we are, we got to the culture where and even when this Mahmoud Khalil case happened, some pro-Palestinian protesters, I think it was specifically the Jewish Voice for Peace, or some Jewish organization, pro-Palestinian Jewish organization, that occupied a Trump building, and that was also said to be, this is like a free speech issue.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah.
Ayn Rand had directly addressed this, very early on in the 1960s, when the 1960s protesters were making the exact same arguments, and she called this out for exactly the conceptual confusion and the anti-concept of what they were turning free speech into when she called out very explicitly and deliberately what was called the free speech movement at the UC Berkeley for what they were engaging in, which was actual thuggish illegal activities. Now, you mentioned they're violating the property rights of the universities, and there's some confusion about this too, because the universities, as like a private university like Columbia, because the public universities like UCLA and others kind of complicates matters given that they're state entities. But let's even take a private university like Columbia. When they were choosing not to enforce their own policies, one could say, well, they're not violating their property rights if they're not choosing to enforce their own policies. But they're still violating the rights of the university by engaging in vandalism. Just, I mean, if you Google student protests at Columbia, you will see massive destruction of doors, windows, buildings. They were engaging in illegal encampments. And they were violating not just the rights of the university, they're violating the rights of the students who are paying the university $90,000 a year to attend classes and to receive this education from the university. And this is the basis of some of the lawsuits. This is called tortious interference with the contract. They actually blockaded students, and particularly Jewish students, from accessing areas of the university and accessing buildings. So, I mean, they're engaging in mayhem. They're engaging in trespass. They're engaging in vandalism. They're engaging in destruction of materials that, by the way, you don't need permission of a property owner to say, yes, stop that person. If someone is smashing a window of a bank, you don't need the bank to say, yeah, we want him prosecuted. The state can prosecute him, and the state should prosecute him for committing a crime. And these protesters were committing crimes. They were not, standing up and giving a speech at an auditorium. If someone's to stand up and give a speech before an auditorium or a group of people saying, I think the slaughter of 1,400 innocent people on October 7th was great, that is a matter of free speech. But that is exactly what they're not doing. That's why they're having to wear masks. They have to wear masks. You wonder, why are they wearing masks? It's because they're committing crimes.
Yeah, and we really got to this point. It's really a scary point in the culture where these people do have straight up, in many cases, actual like pro Hamas sort of attitudes, pro Hamas sort of speech, which, as you say, could technically fall under free speech, and I think even should so. But I think on a more societal level, the fact that these people are not ostracized, the fact that these people are allowed to graduate from Colombia, are allowed to sort of, even those participating in those protests are allowed to basically finish their degree, go on with their lives as if nothing happened, as if they didn't have these abhorrent ideas. The fact that yeah, Colombia allows, or any university for that matter. It's not like Colombia is the only rotten apple. Really shows the degradation of the culture, and the question is, how do we even move from this point? How do we even get to the point where, uh, yeah, these ideas are no longer accepted? What do you think we can even go from here?
Yeah, I mean, but I still want to come back to addressing some of the confusions about what's really going on here, because I unfortunately, especially I see this among objectivists who are reading, leftist critiques of this, um, and have been caught up in this notion of turning open immigration almost into a package deal concept or an anti-concept that is not reflect actually what proper open immigration represents. And I mean, because it's certainly true, we should ideally have open immigration. People should have the right and used to have the right to freely move between countries. You didn't have to have passports. You didn't have to have visas or green cards to move between countries historically. These were things that were actually adopted in World War I and continued to be used and implemented by countries ever since. But it still was the case that even before then, when we had open immigration, it wasn't true that we let in every single person who came into our country. At Ellis Island, there were, where my great grandparents went through at the turn of the century, they were part of the great wave of immigration, escaping the pogroms in Eastern Europe. Um, you know, the standard question that was still asked of immigrants was, "Are you here to become a ward of the state?" Because even then they had they had minimal, especially the states did, not the federal government, had some type of minimal welfare type systems. And and if the answer to that was yes, they wouldn't let you in the country. And that's legitimate. You're not, we don't want you to come here if you are simply going to become a burden, an economic burden, and violate the rights of other people by justifying the state to continue to take taxes from other people to have to support you. And related to this, related to ward of the state is, are you here to commit crimes? Because again, if your purpose for immigrating to another country is to commit crimes, then you can be rightly excluded from immigrating to that country, even under a proper open immigration system. Again, right? The point is that why are you choosing to immigrate? What is your purpose or goal here? And this is why, for a very long time, the United States has actually explicitly excluded in its immigration laws, and I don't think that this is something that is wrong. People who were members of the Nazi Party in Germany. I mean, this is actually specifically called out in the immigration statute. If you're a member of the Nazi Party or supported the Nazi Party, you are not allowed to immigrate to the United States. With very stated explicit exceptions, like you're required to be, because as a citizen of Germany, for instance, or something of that sort during the Nazi rule. But but also the Communist Party, because if you're an active member of a Communist Party, you were dedicated to the violent overthrow of the United States government. I mean, that's foundational to the communist doctrine and to communist parties, and it was part of their actual constitutions and various founding documents. And in fact, my introduction to immigration law was not as a lawyer, but was when I was in graduate school at Columbia University in the 1990s, when the then chair of the philosophy department, Akil Bagrami, was bragging at a cocktail hour with graduate students, because I was in the PhD program, about how he lied in his immigration form to immigrate to the United States and get a green card because he had been a member of the Communist Party of India. And he was complaining about how like he was required to lie on his immigration form to emigrate to the United States because he had been a member of the Communist Party of India. It's like, well, if you're a member of the Communist Party of India, which is dedicated to the violent overthrow of the U.S. government, I think the U.S. government has a legitimate interest in securing the rights of its citizens and the protection of its country to exclude you from coming into the country to sow further discontent. I don't think it's a coincidence that he is chair of the philosophy department at Columbia, where we're seeing these types of activities occurring, and where other professors like him have been breeding the types of nihilistic, anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic brown shirt thugs that have been rampaging on that campus and violating the rights of students and the university, and even other professors for the past 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the sort of the question, are you planning to become the ward of the state? And it reminded me of whenever I travel to the US. Thankfully, I have ability to get ESTA, which makes it much
Mhm.
easier to travel, and I'm a big fan of. And it has questions like I just wanted to look it up specifically. Do you seek to engage in or have engaged in terrorist activities, espionage, sabotage, or genocide? I didn't even remember the genocide part, but yeah, you clearly have like, and these are simple questions. These are not things unless again it goes too far when they start denying people, which the American immigration system should probably be much more free. But there is still clearly a case in some examples now. Uh, and oh yeah, a point I wanted to make is even with open immigration, right? When you are sort of a recent immigrant and you commit a crime in the United States, there is a likeliness that maybe if you are in the US for a long time, you will go to US jail or US prison. But if you have been in the US for like half a year and you commit a crime, I think there's absolutely a case for deportation, which I think can be made the case here. Now, uh, I'll give you this question because this is something I've been sort of fighting with the most is specifically the actions that are being taken. The way I would normally imagine, I think in a free society, the way this would go is somebody would commit a crime, they would go to trial, and if it's proven in the court and they are sort of a recent immigrant, like in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, they might get deported or go to prison. Now, the way this is taken is a bit different. At least my understanding is since he is a visa holder, there's sort of like a different, something you oftentimes hear is he has not been charged with a crime, and my understanding is that he technically doesn't have to be. And it could be still lawful. So what do you make of that whole thing?
Well, I want to question you on your original premise. You said in a free society, it has to be this way. He has to go to court and has to be proven of a crime, and then you deal with it at that point. Why are you making that assumption? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, because he's not a citizen of our country. He is not a citizen. He's not, he doesn't, I mean, fall within he is a visitor. And open, you know, so yes, you have open immigration and, but then there are still the distinction between people who are citizens of the country and fall within the scope of the particular civil rights and have the particular rights that are accorded to them as members of our country, and to which our laws apply, and people who are visitors to our country. And then there's an additional question that arises. Well, what's the level of due process? What are the levels and what laws apply to them and how do they apply to them? And this is where, too many people make kind of like too quick judgments. These are complex questions. These are legitimate, complex institutional design questions about how you actually implement in real world through real world institutions and doctrines, the broader principle of laissez-faire capitalism, it's free society that secures the rights of life, liberty, and property. Those are abstractions for which then you have to lots of concrete specifics to which they have to be applied. And like I said, I'm not an expert in immigration law, and I think it would be but but I think countries have legitimately, for a very long time, distinguished between the doctrines that apply as civil laws to civil rights of their citizens and the various doctrines and institutions that apply to people who are visiting in the country. And I don't think that that's a false distinction. And I think it's an important distinction, and it's one that we have to figure out how to apply in these instances. So I'm not necessarily convinced that that's why I said I have to go to your first premise, the very premise you started with. Well, of course, there has to be a trial, and they have to go through the process of a trial and find if someone is a visitor in our country, I could be convinced that, yeah, you would have to be actually found guilty. A jury would have to find you guilty of a crime. But why are you making that assumption? Why? I mean, if there isn't any, if the activities of which the person is engaging in, right, have been violate the terms of a separate statute from the criminal code that has been set forth. But the criminal code is a basis or a reference point for understanding at least some of those terms of those statutes. So like the immigration statute says, if a person endorses or espouses terrorist activity or persuades others to endorse or espouse terrorist activity or support a terrorist organization, they can be deported or denied entry into the United States, right? And of course, these instances are more often than not going to be instances where people are going to be deported because people who support a terrorist organization or terrorist activity are going to lie about the fact that they do it in order to come into the country. So you actually have a separate statute now where you have determined that they have lied and that they violated. And why do you have to have a separate criminal trial when this is the process by which they're going through? And by the way, this is the process that Mahmoud Khalil and, Rumeza Ozturk, another student who, by the way, there's a video of her being arrested on the street. And I've heard objectivists literally refer to this as, police state tactics. First of all, it's no different than a bunch of, police detectives, arresting someone who don't wear, uniforms, police uniforms, because they're detectives, they're undercover cops, doing an investigation and arresting someone who has been accused of violating a law. And she was accused of violating a law. And by the way, she also is not being accused of simply espousing support for terrorism. Her evidence of her support of violating this statute from the immigration statute is that she organized a violent occupation and takeover of her university library, where there actually was destruction to the library that occurred as well. So, again, this isn't a matter of free speech. This is an issue where they've engaged in activities that are illegal given the nature of the activities as defined by our immigration statutes. And we have immigration courts for that purpose. And right now, as it stands, they are getting the process. Again, these accusations that they have been kidnapped and dragged away in the dead of night and things of this sort. I mean, police have gone, they've arrested them, they've gotten access to lawyers, they are going through process, and they will be deported as a result of that process. So again, I would ask people not to necessarily just rely upon op-eds on left-oriented websites like TechDirt and other places, and actually investigate sources a little bit more and actually look into these things, because the fact of the matter is that, as you said, Daniel, and I know Razi's similar, and he'd be here if he wasn't sick, and I and others have been following these people and their activities for 18 months, and they have been, I call them brown shirts, and I don't use that term lightly. I mean, they are the equivalent and are doing the exact same things that the Nazi brown shirts, and the brown shirts were the thugs, literally the college-educated thugs who were literally smashing windows and beating up Jews in the streets in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, violating the laws of Germany at that time, in which the Germans were refusing to enforce those laws against them. And so, I think that these people can be and should be deported for their criminal activities, both under the immigration statutes, as by reference to their criminal activity that they've taken, as which is what triggers the application of the immigration statute, not the criminal statute.
That's really great. We're running out of time, and I want to
Yeah.
quickly go through a few more things. But yeah, on the case of sort of the brown shirts, and people oftentimes make the case when you do Nazi comparisons is, well, people are not being put in concentration camps. But it's not like Hitler in the 20s started putting Jews in concentration camps, right? He first set up a paramilitary organization. He first set up, yeah, these thugs to try to both influence people into taking certain actions, try to push things through force, try to have a certain culture that by the time that he started putting people, or by the time something like Crystal Night happens, people either joined with them or simply watched by as it happened. So yeah, that's why you have to stop it and you have to sort of monitor it as soon as it starts happening, because you get to the point where there is no longer sort of going back. Uh, we have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. Super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, PC says, this person should be removed from the US by the CBP, which is the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He's not a U.S. citizen and he broke the law. So yeah, maybe just sort of my last question would be that yeah, he's not a U.S. citizen. I think what his status is permanent resident, and yeah, I think there is a question that sort of, yeah, if you are somebody who is in the US, let's say he just came in, there's obviously a different standard than a citizen, and I think maybe even when somebody becomes already a permanent resident, although sort of even the permanent resident is already sort of a result of a mixed economy, right? Because if we had an open immigration, once you come in, you're technically a permanent resident by default, that basically you were allowed to come in and you are. So I guess my sort of a clarifying question would be, we have the sort of US court and then we have the immigration court. And what is usually, let's say, the standard of proof that when something like this happens, how sure can we be that basically what he is being deported for has been sort of given its sort of due, yeah, I guess due process, but sort of appropriate due process
Yeah.
for his status.
Yeah, again, so these are the really those are some of the really interesting legal questions. And this is why you need legal scholars. This is why you need legal philosophers, because it's not obvious how you to go from the political principles of the protection of rights and what it means to have a laissez-faire society to how that is implemented in particular institutions and laws in a particular society. And it shouldn't be treated obvious, like, oh, well, this is just an easy, I can just deduce this, because you can't. What standards should we have between civil laws and criminal laws? What should be the differences in proof? What should be the differences in legal standards and evidentiary standards? I mean, these are this is why I specialize in intellectual property and I special and remedies and private law contexts. And I don't study constitutional law, and this is why there are some very different, significant differences in constitutional law from other areas of law. And I just, would like people to be more sensitive to these types of issues, right? Don't make assumptions that, oh, well, the same standard should apply for someone accused of murder for someone who is, who has violated a statute that says if you support a terrorist organization that engages in terrorist activity, and by the way, Hamas is an officially designated terrorist organization. So if you are going around saying Hamas is great. What they did on October 7th was resistance. And by the way, from the river to the sea, which is a genocidal slogan, it has no other meaning other than the wiping out of all Jews in Israel and the wiping out of Israel, right? Then you are espousing support for an official terrorist designated organization. Now, whether that is clear and convincing evidence, preponderance of the evidence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, these are all of the differences between of evidentiary standards that are deployed in the law. And like I said, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I don't know what standards they apply. I don't know their processes. And so, but we shouldn't be making kind of wide generalized assumptions that like what's occurring with the arrest of these people, the lawful arrest, and where they were taken to a jail. And by the way, if you're arrested by a police officer on the street, it's not like they know exactly what jail you went to and and you have access to a lawyer within 30 seconds. So all of the allegations about what happened to him are just completely false. And, it's bombastic rhetoric to say, oh, he was squirreled away to a detention center. No one knew where he was. Well, how did his lawyers eventually find him and speak with him and file motions on his behalf in the immigration court? I mean, the fact of the matter is that he was accorded all of the regular due process that people are accorded in these activities and through these processes. So yeah, you're asking good questions, and these are kind of the difficult questions. And I don't think there's necessarily any easy answers to them other than but the obvious point being that there are borderline cases, but he is not a borderline case. I mean, we have been this is what I want to keep coming back to. One could have borderline cases, and there are mistaken cases as well, as there are in it, because no human institution runs perfectly, because humans aren't omniscient or omnipotent. But his is not a borderline case. I mean, he ran an organization that engaged in violent criminal activity at Columbia, violating the rights of students, violating the rights of professors, and violating the rights of Columbia as an institution, regardless of whether Columbia wanted to look the other way, like the Germans looked the other way when Jews were being beaten up in the street. And his is an easy case where this is a person who is justifiably, you want to be kicked out of your country. He is a fomenter of terrorism in our country. In fact, the organizations that he is involved with, from the Students for Justice in Palestine, all the way through the BDS organization that he runs, have been directly connected with Iran and Hamas and other organizations. I mean, even under the Biden administration, which was refusing to pursue any prosecutions and any investigations by the FBI, acknowledged in a press conference in the spring of 2024 that these protest organizations, these pro-Hamas protest organizations, were being funded by Iran and other terrorist sponsoring governments and organizations. So this is not in doubt. And so this is an instance where we should not be holding this person up as an exemplar of overreach by our federal government or by the Trump administration.
Yeah, and even you mentioned the funding by Iran. Once, even for those people who want to make the free speech argument, once you start receiving money from a terrorist organization or from a enemy state of the U.S., or even coordinating sort of any sort of basically any sort of arguments or
Yeah.
anything in that regard, yeah, you are no longer at the sort of the free speech aspects, even citizens. Now. We have to wrap up, but I had one more thing. People should actually watch the video when Mahmoud Khalil was taken. I cannot really imagine the more sort of like peaceful, simply somebody, the officials going in saying we have to take you, just and he sort of relatively peacefully like submitted. Like I don't think anything crazy happened there. I mean those things, like when you have a police taking someone, yeah, it's obviously people are going to be nervous. Somebody is coming with the sort of the threat of the gun technically
Mhm.
behind it. But as long if you believe America is still, which I think it is, sort of a nation built on laws, a nation built on a legal system, you should trust in the process itself. That yeah, you will not just be sort of thrown into jail for nothing, or thrown, completely destroyed, or anything in that regard. With that, Adam, thank you for joining me today. Any last thoughts, and where can people find you if they would like to follow you?
Yeah, well, so I guess, one of my last thoughts would be, it's a real, I started by saying, I can understand why some people may not know what's really going on and eh, what Mahmoud Khalil and Rameza Oztuk and other student brown shirt thugs have been doing for the past 18 months in our country. It's unfortunate, and even worse so, it's unfortunate that Americans today now know Mahmoud Khalil's name more than they know the 5 Americans who are still held hostage by Hamas. There actually are 5 American citizens who are still to this day held hostage by Hamas. There's about 41 hostages still being held. And the fact that more Americans know Mahmoud Khalil's name, and the Democrats and others have come out in defense of him and have said nothing about the 5 Americans that have been held hostage by Hamas is goes back to your earlier point about the kind of the deep cultural rot and that we have in our country that is indicative of what is happening here. And and that this is replicating 1920s and late 1920s and early 1930s Germany. And this is why we have to address these matters. And this is why it's legitimate to address these matters, and they're addressing them appropriately.
Yeah, and it should be also mentioned that even the 5 Americans who are held in Gaza, only one of them is assumed to be alive, which makes it even more sad thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
with that, we have the reality show coming up talking about Mike Wallace, Ireland's top Hamas propagandist. So make sure to join us for that. Thank you again, Adam, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye bye.
Thank you, Daniel.